Why Real Money is Indispensable from The Golden Machine by Isabel Paterson. Another statement about property reveals the primitive mental level of collectivists, the proposal to abolish inheritance of property. Since property is intangible objects, there are only two ways by which inheritance could be abolished. The objects must be destroyed, or else declared to be no longer property, debarred from use, a dead man's land let go back to wilderness. Savages or barbarians sometimes adopt this course, as when the goods and gear of the dead were buried with them and their huts burned, or the Viking ship became his funeral pyre, or former campsites were abandoned. What the collectivists mean but do not say, because if it was stated truthfully it would hardly appeal to any rational person, is that on the death of an owner the government should seize whatever property he had, a piecemeal expropriation which would take in all existing property in the course of a natural lifetime. No moral or intelligible reason can be adduced why Hitler, Stalin, or any other government official should inherit the product of every man's thrift, labor, and care rather than his wife, children, or whomever he wishes to have it. But that is the proposal. Debt and taxes arrive hand in hand. The economists who advocate fiat money, paper currency not redeemable in gold, or else an arithmetic sign which they call a commodity dollar, perhaps because it is neither a commodity nor a dollar, are below mental level of savages. The savage applies number, but he has not advanced to the abstract concept. The advocate of fiat money has forgotten how to apply number. Sir Isaac Newton was asked by the British Treasury officials and financiers of his day why the monetary pound had to be fixed quantity of precious metal. Why, indeed, must it consist of precious metal or have any objective reality? Since paper currency was already accepted, why could not notes be issued without ever being redeemed? The reason they put the question supplies the answer. The government was heavily in debt, and they hoped to find a safe way of being dishonest. But Newton was asked as a mathematician, not as a moralist. He replied, "Gentlemen, in applied mathematics you must describe your unit. Paper currency cannot be described mathematically as money. A dollar is a certain weight of gold. That is a mathematical description by measure, weight. If it is a set piece of paper of certain dimensions, length, breadth, and thickness, or else weight, a dollar? Certainly not. Is a given sized piece of paper or dollar, even if numerals and words of a certain size are stamped on it with a given quantity of ink? No. They took Newton's word for it, possibly conceding that the greatest mathematician of their age might know the primer of his science. But the fact that educated men were ignorant of the first rule by which they carried on their own business, commerce, and finance, and the further fact that Newton's answer has since been forgotten many times, in spite of the disastrous consequences which ensued in its time, indicates a very grave problem of civilization. Mathematics is the world language of the energy age. Its use goes far beyond that of Latin in the Middle Ages. While it expresses international relations, it is also the instrument of practical thought and communication in daily life. Anyone who operates power machinery has to think in mathematical ratios: time, speed, distance. The men who organize and perform the practical tasks by which modern civilization is kept going, whether they are truck drivers or aviators, mechanics on the assembly line, engineers or industrial managers, think correctly in the practical language of modern civilization while they are on the job. If they reverted for one day to the primal level of intelligence in respect of their work, at the end of that day the whole country would be a scene of wreckage. But if those are entrusted with the general direction and political organization of a vast system which depends throughout on the correct knowledge and use of the language of mathematics, actually do not know or do not understand the most elementary statement in that language, how can the system function? If politicians and financiers will believe neither logic nor evidence for a rule as primary as that two and two make four, what will convince them? The verbal language of AI civilization is also a precision instrument. When words are used without exact definition, there can be no communication above the primitive level. If those who are supposed to express or influence public opinion, the writers, economists, social theorists, and pedagogues, think in the concepts of savagery, what can be the outcome? What is most astonishing is that when the enemies of civilization have openly declared their intention to destroy, break down the secret of the high energy society of contract and have explained how they mean to do so, those who are to be destroyed will deliberately carry out the program of ruin. The explicit threat is cited by J. M. Keynes. Lenin was certainly right. There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction. The requirements of a sound currency are simple. If 5 apples are exchanged for a pound of cheese, the cheese for 2 yards of cotton, and the cotton for a peck of potatoes, and the potatoes for 2 hours of labor, by what common measure can these various items be reckoned? Each is worth any one of the others, and all of them are worth 5 times what any one of them is worth. But it signifies nothing to say that any one of them is worth one, or that 5 of them are worth five. One what? One five what? Things which are equal to the same thing are equal to one another. As several items can be exchanged, they must be equal, but in what terms? Not in pounds, yards, or hours. They are equal in value. Then what is wanted is a unit of value to reckon by. Any of the items could be designated as the unit of value if the sequence of transactions were considered closed on the spot. But these are perishable goods and have been considered as fixed quantities. General exchange must go on in an endless sequence through time and distance, to include variable quantities of raw materials existent in nature, labor applied to them, and end use, consumption, or interactive possession. then what is wanted is a medium of exchange, something for which anything else can be exchanged, so that it enters into every transaction as the unit of value and serves for an indefinite number of transactions and endless use. If the pound of cheese had been exchanged for a certain weight of precious metal, a dollar and a dollar for 2 yards of cloth, and then again for a bag of potatoes, and again for 2 hours of labor, and again for 5 pebbles, each item would be worth $1 and all of them would be worth $5. If all the goods were consumed, the dollar would remain to continue the sequence of exchanges. Further, if a man who has perishable goods, say apples, does not want any other goods immediately, he can sell his apples for money, and the money will keep enabling him to buy a sack of flour the next year, though the wheat which went into the flour was not yet sown when he sold the apples. That is the use of money. It facilitates immediate exchange. It is a repository of value, and it carries exchanges through time on the long circuit of energy. The use of things depends upon their intrinsic qualities. Cheese is edible. Leather is used for shoes because it is pliable, tough, long-wearing. For the material used for money must be durable, divisible, incorruptible, portable, not easily imitated, and found in nature in sufficient but limited quantity. Nothing but the precious metals answer to these intrinsic requirements. There is never enough money in the society of status. The free economy produces its money as it produces steel by going and getting it, digging the ore out of the ground. Neither it is an accident that the supply of real money increased as production of goods increased. The advanced methods of production permitted low-grade ore to be smelted at a profit. Nevertheless, the quantity of gold available is always limited. Gold was not and is not given value by fiat, any more than cheese or cotton or leather are given value by fiat. It has value because it serves a vital need. Nothing can be given value by fiat. If a gold coin of the Roman Republic were dug up now, it would have its original value. Though the Roman Republic perished 2000 years ago, so would the Russian gold ruble minted under the Tsars, or a gold coin of Germany or France dated 1914. Though the last Tsar was shot in a cellar, the last German emperor fled the country and died in exile, and France has suffered invasion and conquest. But paper currency of Russia, Germany, France before 1914 is now waste paper. A dollar is a certain quantity of gold. That is not a matter of opinion. It is so by definition and by law, federal statute. All the gold held by the government belongs by right and law to individual citizens who placed it on deposit originally, just as money in a private bank account belongs to a depositor. A dollar bill is a certificate of deposit, a warehouse receipt for a dollar. The value is in the metal on deposit, just as the value indicated by any warehouse receipt is in goods it calls for. If the goods do not exist or are destroyed, will not be delivered, the paper has no value. That is what happened in Germany when paper currency was printed through, though there was no gold to redeem it, and a Carload of paper currency would not buy an egg. Neither are tax money. They are promises to pay money. Otherwise, anyone could write a check and obtain goods for nothing. If it is said that anything will do for money, as long as people accept it, let it be asked, why will not people accept anything? Offer the man who says anything will do for money a handful of pebbles in payment of a debt. The absolute necessity of real money, the unit and process metals, for any extensive sequence of exchanges has been proved by the very theorists who said it was a mere convention, and by the nation whose agents are still spreading propaganda to persuade other nations they wish to destroy that a managed currency consisting of nothing but printed paper is just as good or better. Communists and other advocates of government ownership argued for a century that vouchers for labor would be just medium of exchange and that real money was a capital device to exploit the workers. Then they tried their own scheme in communist Russia and could not make it work even by terror and starvation. It was not that people would not accept labor vouchers. The poor wretches were forced to accept them. It was simply that the necessary application of arithmetic to goods and labor could not be made at all without real money. In applied mathematics, you must describe your unit. Communist Russia had to go back to the gold unit. Why cannot even slave labor and forced transfer of goods be carried on with labor vouchers instead of real money? The transactions need only be followed through to discover the reason. To be sure, if a single slave owner held land with natural resources to supply every need and slaves to perform all the work of production, he could distribute to the slaves whatever he pleased, but he would not need labor vouchers. But suppose then 10 men, slave or free, should work to grow wheat in a certain field. It is perfectly possible to divide the product by vouchers for the number of hours of labor. Then suppose 10 other men work in the adjoining field growing sugar beets. The same division can be made, and a labor hour portion of wheat could be exchanged for a labor hour portion of beets. But the quantity of wheat to beets which a labor hour voucher represents has been established only for the given product of the given fields for that one season. In other fields, beets or wheat grown by other groups would yield different quantities per labor hour. Further, when the wheat went to the mill or the beets to the sugar factory, more labor hours would have to be included, not to mention the labor hours represented in the machinery. Then what quantity of goods would a labor hour voucher call for? The whole scheme is impossible. Nobody but a collectivist could be so feeble-minded as to imagine such a system. In applied mathematics, you must describe your unit with a goal unit of value. Labor hours and material and depreciation of machinery and everything that goes in the whole process can be reckoned by a common measure, and they must be reckoned somehow in order to move anything at all from field to factory to shop. So the prices on the goods will show what can be bought for any given sum in currency. But if a paper currency is not actually redeemed on demand in real money, gold. If the citizens cannot regain possession of their own property when he presents the certificate of deposit because the immediate incumbents of political office, members of the government, refuse to obey the law as they have refused, then what difference does it make whether the gold really exists or not? What difference would it make if all the gold in the world should vanish utterly, dissolve into air, or be sunk at an unknown spot in mid-ocean? Or if there were only one gold dollar in existence to be described as the unit of exchange, would not that too? There is in that question, which has been put by those who should know better, an implicit assumption that seizure and sequestration of gold by governments does not or need not make any difference. If that is true, why do governments seize gold? Unless the action is to be imputed to a kind of hoodlum idiocy, like that of street loafers who snatch things at random. Obviously, it must make a difference. Probably most people do not recognize any difference between temporarily suspending payment of gold and seizing gold, although the difference is precisely that between a bank suspending payment and a banker going through a depositor's pockets for whatever he may have left after the bank has failed. When money is left on deposit in a bank, there is the contingent risk that the bank may not be able to pay promptly on demand. That is default. The bank has assets which may be sold to pay depositors. The citizen who holds a dollar bill has real money on deposit with the government. Somebody brought in raw gold to the mint, for which by law he was entitled to receive coin in the same quantity minus a small percentage for the cost of minting. But instead of taking the real dollar, someone accepted a certificate of deposit. The government never owned any gold, but was permitted to hold it until called for. As the government also borrows large sums on bonds and spends the money, if any people want their own money at one time, the government may be unable to pay. It is in default. The government has no assets with which to meet its debts. Government property would not bring much even if it was sold, because it is non-productive, and besides, the creditor has no recourse in law. The contingency of suspension of gold payments by government is unavoidable as long as governments are permitted to issue paper currency and borrow money. These are intrinsically dangerous powers, but it is doubtful if the question will ever receive intelligent consideration, or at least not until men learn to think more boldly.